Early in the spring of 1981, when I was 10 years old, I made my way toward the massive front door of the United States Supreme Court for the first time. My parents, who'd allowed me to take the rare day away from school for the occasion, had briefed me on what to expect during my first visit to the court. I was expected to sit up straight, remain attentive until the argument session had come to an end, not to fidget, lest I disrupt the proceedings. I'm sure they didn't mean to scare me, but by the time we got in the car to make the short journey to the court, I was convinced that I'd be arrested immediately by the Supreme Court police if I so much as sneezed while the court was in session. Perhaps realizing I'd be more likely to focus on the game if I knew the names of the players, they gave me a small piece of paper showing which justice sat in which seat. Although we entered the Supreme Court through the garage that day, I found myself wishing we had come in through the west entrance after climbing the 44 marble steps that separate the court from the ground. Even to a 10-year-old kid, even the idea of walking up those steps conveyed some semblance, however faint at the time, of a deeper meaning. It has since occurred to me that when climbing those stairs, you find yourself leaving the swamp of Washington and the often petty political conflicts that abound there behind and entering a higher plane of existence, which, of course, we were. Both inside the court and out, I saw so many important symbols that I hardly knew where to look. On what seemed like every wall, I saw figures that I thought I recognized from school but couldn't quite place. On the outside, just above the west entrance, carved in white marble, was a scene with dozens of historical characters, all crowded together. Under them, written in clear block letters, were the words, "Equal justice under law." I'm sure I could have spent hours looking at all those statues, friezes, carvings, and other artistic depictions of things I knew were significant, even if I couldn't identify them by name. But we didn't have time. We were ushered into a small office just outside the courtroom, where we waited quietly for a few minutes. At the appointed hour, my mother let us know that it would soon be 10 o'clock, when oral arguments before the court were scheduled to begin. And as my parents had made sure I knew, the Supreme Court always begins on time. We made the short walk down the hall to the courtroom, walking slowly through the crowd to take our seats near the middle of the room. I again looked around, doing my best to process everything I saw. The chamber's main feature was a massive, simple wooden bench with 9 empty leather chairs behind it. There was a lectern in the middle of the room and 2 long wooden tables on either side. Each table, I noticed, had a large quill pen and ink placed in the middle. Even then, the writing implements seemed strange. I knew that down in the real world, the one we had left when we entered the Supreme Court, people didn't use feather pens anymore. In fact, I wasn't sure I had ever even seen one used in real life. But here, in this vaunted chamber, it seemed that they did. The rest of the room, with its old-fashioned depictions of gods and angels, only heightened the impression of being somehow out of time, and maybe even out of this world. Then, through a small crowd of young men at the front of the room, I saw the familiar face of my father, Rex Lee. He stood at one of those long wooden tables facing the bench, looking over his papers and speaking with some of the lawyers who'd gathered around him. After we had found our seats, he looked at us, waved, and smiled. I could tell that whatever he was about to do, it was something of tremendous importance, both for him and for everyone else in the room. A few months earlier, shortly after Ronald Reagan defeated Jimmy Carter to become president, my father had been nominated and, following Senate confirmation, appointed by President Reagan as the Solicitor General of the United States.